Alright, welcome guys. My name is Trevor Richardson. To give you a little context, I started developing front-end software here at Gain actually about 6 months ago. I did a little bit before that. Got my hands into some React and Redux stuff, but not very much right before that. Probably about a month. So I've been doing this React Redux stack for about 7 months now. So. Not a ton of experience, but I've gotten a chance to dig in and learn quite a bit about it in the process. So one of the first things that I actually did here when I came here was we were having some problems when we had, there's certain components of our software that there's lots of little elements that need rendered all the time. And so one of our first problems was we would change values on one of these components, and literally everything in our stack would reload. And coming into using React, all you hear is performance and being smart about when to render and all this sort of thing. And so with the problem we were having, it really surprised me, and I didn't expect it. So this talk is kind of born out of that, and it just has sort of piqued my interest. And we've also had quite a few things that we've had to look into since then. So we've had to learn quite a bit and actually use these practically. So today's talk is really, I don't have any slides. This Vim view here that I have is literally my slides, just to kind of keep some context on what's going on here. And we're just going to dive in and go over some of the things that we have found useful, and some of the different tools that you can use while you're trying to debug different, whether it be performance or just straight up like you're not understanding what's rendering and how things are being rendered. If you're expecting something a little bit weird than how you had built your app. So the first thing that we're going to show is just a basic div, and well, we're going to build a smart cool div, we'll call it, and this guy is not going to have a lot to it, but so what's one thing? Could I go one step earlier? Now let's just go ahead and do this right now. Cool div, we'll call it, and oops, and we are going to return just a straight up div with a little bit of color to it. Actually, no, let's get rid of that. And wow, I don't want to talk about invoke any wars about the way that I'm styling these things, so please refrain from that. Height is 100 pixels, and color background is get. This is something that I have. I built a little RGB colorizer, and all it's going to do is just create some random color, just so that we can see what's changing in the DOM. So we've got our div here. Every time I refresh, that should change color. So right now we have no way of interacting with this here. So what I am going to do is I will create a little higher level div, just to give us some way of clicking on this. Click, I can type, click handler. Then let's build one, click handler. Whoops, I already see something that I did wrong. This equals, we're not going to use it for anything, we're just going to allow it to essentially do something. So state is clicks. We'll just start it out with 0. clicks plus equals this dot state dot clicks plus 1. Okay, click handler is not defined. That is what I needed to do. Okay. Your component is defined but never used. Do not mutate state directly. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Whoops, did mean to do that. Just set state. What am I thinking? Shame on me. Set state clicks is this dot state dot clicks plus 1. Thank you, React Tools, for helping me out. All right, this dot, let's see, set state. Set state is not defined. That's great. What am I doing? Set state is not defined. All right, so we want, we're not showing up because we didn't give it any space. Cool. Style equals another one of these. Width is auto. Height is 1. Whoops. Height will be, let's call this one, let's make it just 20 pixels. And all right, and we'll just call this one gray, so that will stay constant. What do we got? Oops. All right, so this guy, oops, set state, clicks, compile, click handler. Whoops-a-daisy. Now that's fun. Okay. Let's start click handler, and we are doing what? Okay, well that's fun. All right. Click handler. Oh gosh, did I really do that? I might have. No, didn't. Okay. On click, this time click handler. What am I doing wrong here? Whoops. That'll do it. Not very helpful output that time. Okay, so long story short, sorry about that. The main thing is here, I am not changing any values, but yet, so all we're doing is rendering this. We're not passing it anything. So with my knowledge before digging into some of this stuff, this shouldn't have updated because I'm not passing it anything new, so it, we're not trying to modify state inside of it. It has no state. It's a functional component. This shouldn't change. With these colors here, the only thing that I'm just trying to use this as a demonstration that this is rendering, because the color is clearly changing. The first thing that I want to show off of that, how many of you actually expected that to happen? Not sure what the feel is here in the room. Yeah, so you guys probably all knew that. I didn't when I started this, so I was a little surprised by that, so I thought I would pass it along so some people could use it. All right, the next thing I want to show is you actually do not have to have, we don't have to use something like this fake background to figure these things out. So React dev tools, which are awesome, actually come built in with something specifically for that. So if we have this, what you can see is that our whole DOM is updating here. Let's see, and actually, so what I'm going to do here, this tool does not actually show very well. Let's go ahead and make this an actual, let's see, let's make this a stateful component. Well, I'll call it stateful, but really it's not going to have any state. Cool div extends component. So nothing's really changing here. All I'm going to do is render return this. All right. Okay, so the only thing I wanted to show there is that React actually the dev tools here come with something that when you do use classes, not sure what's going on with the functional components, why it's not showing this, but when you use something that is calling render, it's going to show that to you. Now this, like in this small of an app, it's not that useful, but when you have lots of things going on, if something's changing a lot, like if you're showing when you're typing something and you have the world changing out because of that, it's going to show all of that. And for the elements that are changing more often than the others, the color is going to be more dramatic. So it'll be red if it's changing every render cycle or every time you type or something like that. Just it's a quick way that gives you another visualization into what's going on with your app to make sure that what you're expecting to happen is indeed what's happening. You don't have to use it, but we've found it pretty useful in a quick situation where you don't want to write something like this, like the random color generator. But because I think it's cool, I'm going to leave that in there, because it's a little less boring than trying to look at those little blue lines. Okay, what am I actually doing here? That's wrong. Not sure how that went away, but it did. So, all right, so we haven't broken anything. We're still able to catch these clicks, and we're still rendering, even though nothing's changing. So, one of the things that you can use is a pure component. So if you haven't used something, if you haven't heard of pure component, it's just like the normal component from React that you use, but instead of extending component, you extend pure component. And this does more like you would expect from, or at least what I was expecting from the outset with React. So this is going to compare, has anything changed that I've been passed? So even though we're still not passing anything, now when I click on this, nothing changes. It knows that nothing's going on, even though our clicks here are changing. The color's not changing because none of the props are changing. So that's pure component. It's really nice. something to be aware of with the peer component is if you were doing something like, let's go ahead and pass down, let's build a couple of these, and let's pass down a click handler for each of them. So we'll say click handler +2 +1. We'll change that one to a +1 actually. Click handler +2. And this one we'll go ahead and make we'll go ahead and add to, not to burn you guys with details, we'll stop at 3, and then we will pass each of these on click equals click, almost did it again, click handler one, yep. Okay, so now we have, whoops, no, I don't want these right now. Actually, no, I don't want to demo that yet. Sorry, scratch that. Act like I never said that. Okay. Increment. All right, so there, that will be our increment count. So if I want to do something like this dot click handler, so this first one is going to be a count of 1. This guy is going to be click handler and increment by 2. Because we only have one click handler, we want to vary this based on the component that we're passing in. So this could be something like your link is changing per component or something like that. You've all had situations like this that come up. So when we do this now, even though, again, we are using a pure component, that we're passing the same thing all the time, but yet everything changes. So what's going on here? What we have happening here is every time we use, whoops, get a little excited there. And again, there we go. Every time we do something like this, we're creating a new function on the fly. So it literally thinks that the props are indeed changing for everything. So this is something that we currently deal with that we haven't really fully settled on how we want to handle this, and this has actually been quite a discussion in the React community for how to handle this. So Corey House originally wrote this article that you shouldn't do this, and they have a lint config that tells them they have used an arrow function in a React prop, and there were tons of comments back to him that like if it reads better, it's easier to write, why not do it this way? And he did come around, and I'm not sure what the latest is, but he came around to the agreement that if it's the better way to go, then don't pre-optimize. He even used that phrasing that to do this, you literally are kind of pre-optimizing. If it is in your mind better to read and easier to write, then he would agree that you're trying to pre-optimize by doing stuff like this. So what he's suggesting is if you want only go back and try and update all these things once you have figured out that you do have a performance problem, or you have lots of renders going on that you weren't really expecting, something like that. So keep that in mind. Go check it out if you're interested. Definitely something to at very least be aware of. Now another piece that is something else that's worth knowing about is, I'm not sure if any of you use Immutable, but the Immutable library, it maintains the identity checks for, it makes keeping track of where your state's at and verifying that one object is indeed what the previous object previous object was between renders. Immutable can be one way to do that. I'm not going to talk about it right now, but something that another tool that can be really useful for this specific issue if you're using Redux is a tool called reselect. So what this tool does is essentially take your selectors for grabbing things out of the store, and if the result is the same as the previous result, it will give back. So if you have some sort of mapping or something like that after you select stuff out of the store, it will forego that mapping if your results of selection, so if it decided that the objects that the selectors returned were all the same, then it will give back the exact same objects, so that when you do propagate those down to your components, that it makes it easier to do things, to determine, like the pure component, it can decide, okay, this is literally the exact same object that I saw last time, so I can, I don't have to render. So that's another tool to be aware of. We're not going to talk about it today, but certainly if you're interested, let's chat about it after, because we've dealt with lots of problems with this, and there are some unsolved problems actually as well that I'd be very interested in hearing how other people have solved. Don't want to dive into it right now though, because not everybody's using Redux and Immutable, so there is that. Okay, so the final thing that I would like to talk about is another tool that Chrome comes with that's pretty awesome. We're going to build another component to handle this. We'll call it the nester. And we're going to give it a depth. Current depth is equals 0. And max depth equals, we'll say 20. And we'll say 100. And we'll make it 15, just to keep it a little more sane. All right, and then we'll build depth wrong. There we go. All right, so the nester guy, do we have to, no we don't. Let's write this as a pure functional component, and we'll see where we get from there. Nester, and it takes a depth and max depth, and that is what it will use. All right, and it's going to return a nester if it is max depth, if depth greater than max depth, return a div. Otherwise, we are going to return a nester with a depth that is depth plus 1 and a max depth that is the same max depth. Just so it knows how to handle itself. And we're going to give it a little bit of styling, just so we can see what's going on. All right, so we're going to add some padding, 10 pixels, and it's the color background is get random color. Okay, cool data is defined or used. We're cool with that right now. Oops. There we go. Oh, shoot. Clearly this didn't work. All right, so what do we have going on here? Ah, yes, we don't have any width. That would be helpful. Yeah, you guys are getting the gist of what I'm doing here. Oh, what? All right, this is a little unwieldy. All right. That way we can at least see what in the world's going on here. All right, what do we have happening here? Right. Let's hop over and figure out what in the world we have going on here. Oh, that would help. Did help. There we go. Now we're doing the trick. All right, so we got a real funky looking thing here. Another one of the things that is worth being aware of is if you add this little URL, this guy here, and over in DevTools, you go to Performance. If you can get it to go to Performance. Oh. All right, here we go. We'll restart and see what. There we go, the magic key. All right, and then we'll start making this guy. All I'm doing is hitting. That's just a restart. It's going to reload the current page. I'm not sure how much experience everyone has with performance. I've got a little bit. Also, for these specific issues, trying to figure out what's going on with the rendering. If you add in this URL param, and this is only available locally, if you add that in, there will be a user timing section here. And what we're looking at here is pretty awesome because you can literally look at what React is doing. So here we're building our nester, and assuming everything went okay, we should have 50 levels here. Now this tool outright is not like we haven't necessarily found a specific like winning like awesome feature here that we use it for or problem here to use it for, but lots of like weird things have come up that we've just used it to figure out what in the world's going on. One example that came up recently is we would make a change in the interface and the whole page was being re-rendered when really we had tried to set it up so that only a certain level down in the stack excuse me, in the stack would render. So for us, I think it's been more of like a visual understanding type of tool than it really is a, hey, I've got this problem. This would be a great solution for figuring out that problem. So this is yet another tool that's very much worth knowing about. It's really easy to use. You don't have to do anything fancy or any sort of add-ons, which is awesome. Very quick to use. Not always useful though, but for random things, it actually has come in pretty useful for us, actually even recently. That concludes what I have to talk about right now. Hopefully some folks have at least a few questions about this. If anybody has any detailed questions, we could potentially take it offline, but more than happy to answer anything that came up in this talk and anything that people are struggling with right now, hoping to just maybe create a conversation here. The only thing I do want to say is be very careful with how much time you spend on this, because you can very much get yourself into a hole and end up not actually improving any performance. It's kind of hard to tell. I don't have any great insights to just tell you these are the type of problems that are really worthwhile to use these type of tools for, or that sort of thing. A lot of times it's all about the specific app and what things are looking like in regard to the type of problems you're having. So if you're re-rendering a whole bunch of time, sometimes you can figure that out. The biggest and probably easiest thing is if you are rendering your entire stack due to an action or something that you're not expecting to render the entire stack for, then that tends to be a good problem for this, especially like the should component update, which I'm realizing that I never actually showed you guys. So we really ought to do that. And I will go ahead and do that. So, much like pure component, now I'm glad I left that cool div there. Alright, so a situation where this is going to be really nice is, let's see, we want to if we can't just use pure component, say we do for some reason need we need non-click handler that is, we refresh the thing every time. So the main point I add this is because we're just going to force it to change every time that we render. But then you actually also have, we're going to show the value, current value. Cool div value equals this.state.clicks. Right, there we go. No longer going to be pure. Let's get rid of the nestor. Okay. Get rid of that guy. And right now we're going to render every single time. Okay. I suppose we're going to have to build another one of these because all right. All right. The main reason I do this is because I didn't. The first one the value literally is going to be changing all the time. So this thing that I'm passing in is always going to be changing. Now the second one is actually not changing something we're passing in. So if we go and click on the red guy, even though the value we're passing in is not, well, this will be more useful if I do something like this. All right, let's actually just because it drives me nuts. Okay, and we are going to have the this dot props dot value. All right, now we should, there we go. So even though this guy's not changing the value that's passed in, we are trying to re-render. Whereas this one, we do, whoa, what in the world? Clicks, some random value, state clicks. What in the world is being printed out? Props dot value. Oh, I always do this. What am I doing? This dot props dot value. Okay. This dot state dot clicks. Why aren't we getting an object every time? Okay, one gray. All right. Oh, because, whoops, a daisy. That'll do it. Right, not exactly sure what's happening there. What? Okay, well that's fun. Oh boy, that's not good. There we go. That's why demos are awesome. The real stuff. Whoops, sorry, gents. Ladies. Alright, here we go. So, when the value is literally changing, we want it to change. But when the value is not changing, we don't want it to change. So even though, for some reason, we do want to always pass out in this change handler, but it's always going to be changing because of the stuff we talked about before. The thing that you can do with a regular component is should component update. I'm guessing this is what most people are probably the most familiar with. Next props. Okay. Right. What this gives us power to do is we can just return if next props, if this dot props dot value equals, oh, I just did that, sorry, next props dot value. Right. So if those are different, then and only then will we want to render. So now when we're clicking on this, it's not rendering anything because the value is not changing. But when we are changing the value, it changes. So something else to keep in mind, it's another powerful tool, probably the easiest one to use, that's why I forgot about it. That's the talk, and yeah, let's have a conversation, and feel free to submit any comments you might have about it. Thanks a lot.